Tina, you did when you were talking about the infrastructure at Recursion, it was interesting. I think you started to speak to some questions that our audience has around sort of the marriage of wet lab science and computational. You did a nice job of sort of illustrating how the data is being generated in more traditional ways and being fed into the machine, so to speak, and that may speak to some of the skepticism that Andrew just referenced. We've had some questions from the audience. Jeffrey, for instance, not a question, a statement. AI must be guided by biology with critical input on relevant disease states. AI alone will never work. I'm going to throw another one at you that's related from Abjit. Computational biology approaches must include systems biology for target ID and validation prior to any drug discovery research, he said in caps. Do you agree, right? Agree or disagree? So I guess both those questions, they feel related to me. You tell me if they are, but I want to get to a bit of a conversation around what the expectation should be in terms of what's going on the computer versus what's going on the Petri dish.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am a big believer, Recursion's a big believer in these cycles of wet lab, dry lab, right? Computation, experimental confirmation. And Andrew actually just described a great one, right? In Evolve's business model where like Evolve, Andrew, they're doing a computational prediction and then partnering with a biopharma company to actually see how that prediction plays out in the wet lab and then coming back and doing the next round. So that is a virtuous cycle. So just, you don't even have to build it all in one company. And like I said, that's partly Recursion. We have many partners, right? Even though we're building a lot of this cycle ourselves. But I think that is the magic and the necessity. You can't just purely computationally predict and never try to verify that in the real world. And the more the tighter we can get those cycles, the more that you can, predict something that we did earlier this year after our acquisition of Cyclica, a great comp chemistry company up in Canada, is we took the enamine real library, 36 billion compounds, and predicted the interaction of those libraries with proteins, right? So predict what will happen and then actually go run it in the lab and see if you're right. And both when you're right, great, that confirms your prediction. But when you're wrong, that's great too, right? We love failure recursion, right? Because that means that you can learn something, right? If when you don't predict it right, then you can feed that back into the model once again, and then your next version of the model is smarter. And so I think that one of the things I love, and this was when I actually interviewed at Recursion, and I knew that this was probably a place that I just absolutely had to be at, was talking to one of our architects or automation engineers, and he said something along the lines of, right now it still takes 10 seconds, this cycle between like experiment end and imaging, we can do better. Like we can do better than 10 seconds. And I think, right now it takes weeks to predict a chemical compound, get that synthesized, and then run that experiment back on the platform. It still takes weeks for that cycle. Like, we can do better. Like, how can you predict a chemical biological interaction and within days, hours, confirm that in the wet lab, and then the models get smarter, right? I think that is that kind of virtuous cycle and how we can keep building and building. But to these points, just AI in absence of any real world data, that is actually not how technology changes the world. Even if you look at something like, I mentioned Netflix earlier, Netflix is constantly experimenting, I guess, on all of us, right? I love Netflix, right? Like what do I want to watch tonight? What do I want to watch yesterday, right? It's predicting and getting better and better predicting about what I'm going to want to watch tomorrow. And it's constantly testing those observations, right? Its predictions against the real world data of human preference. And so those are the ways we have to kind of think about these virtuous cycles. Not just,
and Matt, I'll just I'll just springboard off of what Tina was just saying right now. So like what Tina just mentioned is a 0 to 1, right? Like, to be able to move experiments that historically have taken months down to, hours or minutes, that's a massive leap forward in our ability to do things. And that's actually not driven by what people would traditionally consider AI, although I would, because it's automation, right? I think that that's a massive leap forward. And so slowing those cycles down is one of those 0 to 1 effects that, you know, you have at companies like Recursion or outsourced companies like Arcturus that can do that kind of thing.